welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. You join us on this early/late autumn/winter day where it's actually all right. We seem to be in between rain showers again, which is quite nice. So the problems that we have faced over the last couple of months with reports that reservoirs are getting down to sort of bare bones haven't really been followed up in any way, I would say, because it's been bloody teeming it down here. So today I am joined by somebody who I thought had actually turned a corner. For such a long time, they were so frightened and avoided horror films. It just did nothing for them apart from had some sort of laxative effect and make them want to go to the toilet. But over the last year or so, since we kind of forced Mary to watch 30 Days of Night, she has embraced the genre like never before, being involved in other podcasts where they're specifically talking about horror films, especially vampire films, and getting involved with the Final Girls Club, which by its very nature is got to do with horror films. And even in the last couple of weeks, some of the films that she has talked about on the pod, all horror, all related, then it only takes to come back to a dark house for the shitebag Mary to return.
Yeah, I really need to invest in some adult Pampers. That's for sure. Like I really, like you said, I thought I'd turned a corner as well, and like it just took the lamps not being on for me to be like, well, that's enough. Time to burn the house down.
If you haven't realised,
to answer your question.
Good.
As well.
Nice, good stuff. If you haven't realised, we are going to be talking about the Conjuring Last Rites film today.
The devil has come to Pennsylvania.
Jack and Janet Smurl claim that an evil presence has found its way into their home.
8 people live in this house. 8 people have experienced this. 8 people are not crazy.
This is the 4th Conjuring film in a series of films that has encompassed films as well as the Annabelle films and the Nun films, but apparently this is going to be the last Conjuring films, hence the title Last Rites. The cast, as previously, is Vera Farmiga as Lorraine Warren and Patrick Wilson as her husband Ed Warren. Added to the mix this time is their daughter Judy, who is now an adult. This film is set in 1986 and initially in 1965, I believe, 64, 65, the opening sequences. Yeah. So the daughter, Judy, is played by Mia Tomlinson, and she is now a full-grown adult and getting ready to move on with her life, and she has a steady boyfriend and is very serious relationship and everything. So the film itself starts, as I say, in 1965, where the Warrens, in a very early case, investigate a death in an antique shop of all places, the very sort of place to hide an item that may contain some sort of malignant spirit. The owner of the shop hung himself after saying that there was some sort of presence there and they felt uneasy about it. And the Warrens are interviewing the daughter of the man, who also has started to feel the same. So they investigate this and they come across this very ornate mirror with 3 heads on it. And as Lorraine touches it, the mirror cracks. And at the same time, she starts to go into labour with her daughter, leading to all sorts of complications from there. Film then cuts to 1986, and it's a family in Pennsylvania that is starting to find that they are the subject of a malignant spirit or spirits that is haunting them. And basically the story goes from there. You've kind of, if you've seen previous Conjuring films, you've got an idea of what happens, the kind of the way the story goes, because let's face it, they are all very similar in the way that these people are brought together in terms of the film itself. But like I say, in this one, there are added complications in that the Warrens are older. Ed himself has been through medical and health problems, and the added element of the daughter as well, who is much more involved in this film than she was in previous ones. But we shall get to that in a moment. So, Mary, given that fact that There's been 4 films. You have seen at least all of the previous 2. I think you've seen 2, maybe 3. I can't remember.
I've seen all 3, yeah.
You've seen all 3. Brilliant.
Yeah.
What were your expectations on the last Rites here?
Do you know, this is going to sound like such an odd thing to say, but I feel like the Conjuring films are a little bit of a comfort watch. Like, it's a franchise that you know exactly what you're going to get going into it. You get a spooky beginning, a family that you're introduced to, bad things going on in their house, and then the Wardens come in. So there's that kind of, and it's not, well, it is formulaic, you know, it is what it is. But yes, there's a comfort there in knowing exactly what you're getting. Plus, you've got the added layer of this obviously being based on a true story because the Wardens were real people. So the first 2 films in this franchise I thought were excellent, the first 2 Conjuring films. The third one I felt was really messy and really all over the place. So I was a wee bit uncertain going into this because I didn't know if it was going to be as good as the first 2 or if it was just going to be a bit of a sort of messy finale. But I knew that I wanted to see it to sort of finish off the sequences that were, like, to, you know, see what happened, how they sort of explained away the sort of Warrens, the latter years of their career. Because as you said, the bulk of this film takes place in the 80s when their popularity was sort of waning. And we see that in the film, you know, nobody's attending their lectures. They're not going out to do sort of investigations anymore. So I kind of wanted to see what they did with that. So expectations were quite high. As I say, there is a sort of familiarity. You kind of know what you're going into in terms of like how the plot's going to unfold. I just hoped it would be better than their last outing. And for me, it certainly was. As I say, this is a kind of odd comfort watch for me, even if I am shitting myself as I'm doing it.
For myself, I think I had seen the first Conjuring film when it came out, but I couldn't remember. But I rewatched 1 and 2 just last week, which are both on Netflix, in case anybody is looking to catch up. But I don't know, well, we'll talk about the necessity of watching these films later. But so I had seen part of 1. I don't remember seeing all of it. Some of it was very familiar to me. 1 and 2 were very, very good. I enjoyed both of them. For what you say, yes, they are. There is a kind of formula there to them. But they're very well made as well.
Yes.
And they're more based around the psychological rather than, you know, what you're actually seeing, the jump scare, whatever. Yeah. So yes, I hadn't seen 3, partly because you said it was shite. So I thought, we'll just avoid that. And the reviews back up your opinion as well, obviously, and that it's not quite in there as well. But yes, I was looking forward to seeing this. And like I say, there is a certain comfort in the way that the film actually progresses as well. Now, given that there was a slight difference this time in that you normally get a pre-credit scene where it's whatever case they happen to be working on, whether it's the Amityville one, for instance, in the second film, or whatever, because it kind of establishes for people who don't really know their credentials again, and that's what they do. But this time, like I said at the start, there's the possessed mirror that they are looking at, but also you've got the added complication of Lorraine being heavily pregnant. And the pre-credits scene in this film runs for 20 minutes, which is quite a long time.
Yeah.
Before you get the title saying The Conjuring Last Rites and the story begins for real, which is really kind of strange because by that point you have been introduced, the family's been introduced and everything. So it is kind of a strange thing. Do you think that was done to try and break up that kind of continuity that people are expecting from 1, 2, and 3?
Do you know what? I didn't actually realise it had lasted as long as 20 minutes. I think obviously they were trying to sort of give you, rather than just set you up of, you know, here's a family, there's a bad mirror in their house, they were obviously trying to pull this link back to the character of Judy, who obviously is quite central in this film. So the fact that Lorraine was obviously about to go into labour with Judy when she first encountered this mirror, it sort of ties a neat sort of thread through the whole thing, because then it's this notion of the mirror obviously reclaiming Judy as opposed to going after Lorraine and Ed, which is usually the case. So I did think it did a good job of setting up those kind of threads. I must admit, I really like the title cards that they use in this film series. It's just that really loaded yellow. You get the jarring sound of music. The title sort of scrapes up the screen, and you have the sort of old-fashioned typewriter font explaining to you what this case is about. So I really like the way they do that. I didn't realise, as I say, that it was a good 20 minutes, but it's obviously doing a little bit of scene setting in terms of explaining to you why because it says, I think, something like this case almost ruined their family and it was their last case. So you're kind of going, oh, right, why is that? But it sets up the threads quite nicely for how the film unfolds, I think.
Yes, there's some very good scenes in there. There's actually like sort of two different elements within the antique shop and also in the maternity ward as well. So that's kind of nice, and it kind of changes the tempo of the series as well, because you don't usually get as much of that to begin with. And I was kind of fearful for that, because I thought, is this going to go in a different way? Is this going to go your quiet bang style way that it's going to try and shock it all the way through, which thankfully it didn't do. It did kind of settled after that. But yes, I was intrigued and I was surprised, because when it did actually come up, I had to write down, I had to look at my watch and see how long it'd been, because I thought, it's been ages. It's just
I didn't realize it was as long as that.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a choice, I suppose, and I do think it does work in this sort of respect as well. So what did you think about the fact that obviously we would have known before we went in that this is their last case? Now, I didn't know very much about the Warrens at all. I haven't read up on them in real life or anything, so I had kind of certain expectations, especially when it was noted that Ed had a heart condition. So
yeah.
Were you glad that they were back, but did you have your kind of fears about what was actually going to unfold?
Yeah, I must admit, I've done a wee bit of reading on the Warrens, but not a lot. So I didn't really know about the latter stages of their life, which is why I was really interested in this. And as you say, they've thrown in really neatly that Ed has a heart condition. And part of me is like, should you be demon hunting then if that's, the ticker's a bit dodgy? But it was a very sort of different introduction to them in the 80s, which obviously is the contemporary setting. Because as I said, you're seeing that they are not as popular anymore. The world has maybe moved on and people think of themselves maybe as more advanced, and therefore their sort of brand of ghost stories, if you want to call it that, had sort of fallen out of fashion. So you can see that they're delivering a lecture and the lights go on and there's only like 3 people in the room and the people are just asking, like, are you basically Ghostbusters? Which obviously is a nice contemporary reference for the 1986 setting. So they're at a stage in their life where they're thinking about sort of winding down, kind of natural retirement stage, but obviously their career has been really different to everybody else's. And so they're thinking about, their daughter who's grown up, she's got a partner. They're saying they're not doing investigations anymore. And so they're kind of preparing themselves for a different type of life. But obviously, given the way the film starts, that this is like one last case, as it were. So yeah, I did kind of wonder how this was going to all tie up, because even though like it's the 80s and stuff like that, they're kind of dressed still quite like old fashioned and things as well, which sort of makes them look even older and a bit more fragile and vulnerable than perhaps they are. But yeah, I was intrigued to see how they were going to wrap this all up. And I mean, obviously this is meant to be the last film in the franchise, but given that they've introduced the character of Judy as an adult, who knows?
Yes. Yep. In terms of Judy, what did you think of her initial story arc in this? Because they introduce her obviously as a baby, and then you get a montage scene, which I didn't expect. You get a montage scene of family life, like going out and playing with the daughter and all this sort of stuff, which in a way introduces a sort of a different element to their life, because all you tend to see of the Warrens when they are on screen is the fact that they're working. There's always something supernatural, and that's still there. All that stuff is still there, but you didn't think of them having this almost sort of normal family dynamic.
Definitely not. And I did find it a bit strange at first, because part of me was like, yeah, you don't imagine like Lorraine Warren doing the dishes and making cookies and things like that. But obviously they introduced this notion that from a very young age, Judy comes crying into her mum and she's like, I can't stop seeing bad things. So that Lorraine's gift, if you want to use that particular turn of phrase, has been passed on to her daughter, who can also sense things. And she teaches her this little rhyme to try and get rid of the bad visions, or whatever you want to call it. So the rhyme, which, why are nursery rhymes so fucking creepy when they're used in this context? But the rhyme is something that becomes a sort of like a sort of through pattern in the rest of the film as she sort of moves into adulthood. But obviously the insinuation is that as Judy moves into adulthood, the visions are becoming worse, or she's struggling to control them as much as she could as a child. So yeah, it's a very sort of like, we're seeing more of their family drama as well as their, you know, spooky shit that they do.
Yeah. So do you think that worked well, the fact that they're introducing a third sort of major character into this at such a late stage as well, like the last film?
Yeah, I think so, because I think it adds another layer, because otherwise it would just, and I know we've talked about it being sort of like fairly formulaic, and that, you know, family has bad stuff happen, Warrens come in, spooky shit goes down. So I think this adds another layer, because it's not just that Lorraine and Ed are going in to help the Smurl family with their, you know, demon or whatever it is living in their house, but they've now got this added concern of their daughter, who they obviously love because they nearly lost her, is experiencing these things for the first time as an adult, and so they feel like an added protection over her, as well as trying to do their job. So it does add a wee layer of like an extra layer of maybe danger or whatever to the case, because they're obviously trying to protect their daughter as well as do their jobs.
Yeah, and the daughter has her own stakes in this as well, because obviously she's now an adult. So when you're a child, you feel as if you've got the protection of your parents, which she obviously did. And as an adult, she's learning that one of the reasons why her parents actually went away and they were away from her for such a long time and for long periods was due to the stuff that she is now actually seeing and being involved in as well. So I did kind of like that. And there was obviously the whole family dynamics in that she had her boyfriend and everything. He got introduced to the family and everything as well. And I thought that was quite nice. It was just other elements to be added to it, and it brought other characters in who would play a role during the film as well, rather than just being a story beat. Yeah,
it did make me chuckle, because if I was a young man and my fiance or whatever said, "Oh, by the way, my parents are in Lorraine Warren, bye,"
yep,
would be my first response. Absolutely not, but the hero. He perseveres.
Yeah, it takes a certain type, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So what did you think about the Smurl family? 3 generations of, I am assuming, Irish Catholic.
Yes. As soon as I saw them, I was like, yep.
All in the one house, living together. How did you think that they were introduced and the sort of dynamic that was brought to the screen by them? What do you think of that?
I loved this. I thought this was a great setup. So you've got the 2 older girls, Dawn and Heather, and it's Heather's confirmation kind of when we meet them. And as you say, there's all this chaos going on in the house. You know, the mum's peeling potatoes, they're making a big dinner, and, you know, they're videoing Heather at her confirmation. And so it's her grandparents that bring the mirror into the house, because that's her confirmation gift, and her big sister saying things like, you know, I got nothing, and they're like, well, actually, dear, we bought you a brooch, and things like that. And you've got all the kind of sibling squabbles that are going on, because there's the 2 older girls and the 2 younger girls in the family as well. And of course, this all kicks off with Heather accusing Dawn of blowing out the candle on her confirmation cake. And then all hell breaks loose. Like, literally, the ceiling caves in and Heather nearly dies. And it's just, I feel like it did a really good job of quickly establishing what the dynamic is like in that family. It's busy, it's loud. You know, you've got the little girls who are always pulling on the phone cord when the mum's making dinner. The dad's exhausted, he's out at work. The older girls are kind of bickering with each other as well, and sort of eye-rolling at everything their parents and grandparents say. So I just thought it did a really brilliant job of showing what family life was like, and obviously how quickly that was destroyed as well, because I think you know, one of the lines that Ed says in the film is like, you know, we meet so many different families, but the one thing they all have in common is the fear. And I think what the film does a really good job of as well is showing how that fear affects the different people within the Smurl family, because obviously at first it's kind of seen as like teenage girl hysteria, because it's only the bad things have only happened to Dawn and Heather. And, you know, Dawn does say to her father, like, you don't believe us because it's not happened to you. That's why you're not doing anything about this. And obviously from there, the demons or the entities, whatever you want to call them, sort of up the ante, and everybody does get involved. It is the grandparents and the parents as well. So I think it's a fascinating dynamic, and it just shows you that if something, once like the bad stuff starts happening, how quickly these characters all sort of not turned on each other necessarily, but just there's this notion of disbelief that it's all happening. So yeah, I thought that was like, I loved those scenes with the family. I thought they were brilliant.
Yeah, the fact is the father didn't believe them for such a long time because they're saying it's just hysteria. They're just, it's girls, you know, it's kids, it's what they do. make it up, they exaggerate things, and wasn't until it happened to him when he was raised up on the bed.
That was scary.
That certainly was, yes. And obviously there was like a number of different things happened at the same time. Mm-hmm. And then they basically all just like rushed out of the house because this was happening. And it was at that point then they contacted the media because they were looking for help. Mm-hmm. And then the father says it's the worst thing that we could have possibly done is contact the media because it's just caused so many problems. Our neighbours hate us. Everybody thinks we're lying. We're just looking for attention. And you were thinking, and if you looked at them, you'd say, this isn't a family that's looking for attention because they've got enough going on with just their normal dynamic. Like you say, it's a messy, big family and there's always things happening in it. They don't need any sort of outside attention from people to say, saying what you're doing and all that. So, yeah, I felt that was really, really good. And I really liked the way that the family were introduced because it was, like you say, it was a confirmation. It was round the big dinner table and they were all there together. And even the dinner together was loud and chaotic and stuff. There's plates getting put down and people were sitting down and, come on. Come on over and sit down and all, because there's so many. It's like, what do you call it? Wrangling cats. That's what it's kind of like.
Exactly.
Trying to get all the kids together and all that. And then, like you say, all the bickering and everything, just sort of a regular family dynamic, if you like, because they do bicker and they don't get on, but there is that sort of love there. And as Ed notes a couple of times, demons and spirits feed on fear. That's their main source of power and fuel, if you like. So if they've got a family, if they've got like 6 people that are all scared at the same time, it's so much more fear that's being generated rather than just one person. So they're, these entities are loving it. They're really sort of kind of in the middle of it. So yes, it's really good. Now, given this is, as I've said a couple of times, the 4th film, do you think that the main performances were as good? Different, obviously. Yeah.
I love Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson together. I think they've got really lovely chemistry. Like, there's some really nice, gentle moments in this film when they're just sort of being with each other and being romantic, and she's got her hands around his neck, and they clearly, they love each other so much as a couple. But equally, there's a lot of, I don't know what you would call it, like horror acting going on in this film. There's a lot of screaming, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of shouting. So I think it's quite a demanding performance from both of them. Obviously, as I say, when you get into the 3rd act and shit really starts hitting the fan. But I love their dynamic together, and I think they've got this really special rapport that I think is quite hard for a lot of actors to actually generate over one film, never mind over 4. And you genuinely care about them and you're invested in them. So I think, the two leads, Ed and Lorraine, if you're going to look at them that way, that still stacks up for me. Like, I'm going to see this film because of them. I like them together as actors, and I'm also like interested to see what they do with the characters. So absolutely, it still holds up for me.
Yeah, I think they had that kind of dynamic even with the first film. So it wasn't as if something had to be built. It was always there because they're very, very good actors, let's face it. With the addition of Judy into the mix as well, I thought that worked really, really well. It's because it seemed very natural, the way that they all interacted and reacted to each other. And like I say, there seemed to be very good chemistry between them all, which has run through the previous films as well. I think that's been one of the sort of standouts, the fact that they are very much in this together, no matter what's actually happening outside of it. Because I know you said like their celebrity at that point was on the wane. They were going to, like, they were doing like college tours and hardly anybody was turning up and people were taking the piss and all that sort of thing. But they were always getting that sort of scrutiny. So like in previous films, you'd seen scenes where they were on talk shows and things like that, and they were getting lambasted in, but they were always putting up this united front.
Oh, definitely. And I think that must have been like obviously really wearing, because they were either sort of ridiculed as it's all in your head, or they were accused of being like charlatans and extortionists as well. And so you do have to have quite strong skin in order to put up with that, and obviously to keep going as a couple. And when they're talking to Judy and Tony, her partner, she's got her hands around his neck and she's leaning on his shoulder, and she's like, well, we just knew really quickly that we were right for each other. And I feel like that's really evident in their performances together, is that they are just like a really good, strong couple.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously with these performances as well, there is a sense of still a certain amount of development because we are introduced to Ed's health issues, like I mentioned. And that actually plays a significant role in this because you have him with scenes at the doctor and all sorts of stuff. So it's cementing the fact that it isn't just something slightly minor, it's something that is potentially life-threatening because of the severity of it. And he's told, you're kind of taking this a wee bit too lightly, you should be addressing this. But that's part of his defense mechanism and kind of he likes to put people at ease wherever possible. And he's using the same technique when he's speaking to the doctor as well. But do you think the added element of this, now I don't know if this is actually true or not, I suspect it will be, it is part of the true story because they wouldn't have added it otherwise just for dramatic effect. People would have complained that it wasn't, in any way true and it was just added as an affectation. But do you think this changed the sort of dynamic between Ed and Lorraine?
Yeah, well, I definitely think that you get the impression that they both kind of want to still be working and doing what they believe they are, here to do, which is these paranormal investigations. But that's a constant kind of through the film. Like even when they're at dinner and he's joking about, I wish I could have lasagna, and he orders like this really elaborate steak meal, and he goes, "But can I have that but with chicken?"
Yeah.
And there's this notion that he is, very, very conscious that his health is not what it used to be. And obviously, like if you have a high risk, high danger, high fright factor job like what they have, that puts you even more at risk. And so you kind of get the impression that they would still love to be sort of out in the field, as it were, but his health is weighing quite heavily on both their minds. And as you see, he can be quite flippant about it and a little bit defensive, but actually, it's something that, as we see in the third act of this film, is potentially, it could end his life, never mind his career.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was interesting that the way that they brought that in and used that as such a strong element in the third act, the way that it sort of played out, because it's all too easy to introduce these things and then just have the characters doing what they do normally and just kind of putting it to the side and going, "Oh, that was close, wasn't it?" It was a real element to it that he had to be very, very careful about what he was doing, and it showed when they were doing things like they were trying to move the mirror, for instance, and he wasn't able to do it in the same way that he would probably have in some of the previous films, just because it's showing that he is older. Because if you think about it, they've been doing that for more than 20 years. So it's going to have a toll on you both physically and mentally. Now, Lorraine's issues all seem to come with sort of more mental issues. The fact that she was worrying about her daughter and obviously about her husband and everything as well. So that played into it, but not to the same extent. That was more brought to the screen in looks and, rather than actually spoken dialogue.
Yeah, I think this film also sort of tipped the balance slightly as well, because in the previous three, because Lorraine is the one who can see and feel and hear the demons, the sort of pressure physically has been on her throughout the past three films, whereas in this film, Ed is at the disadvantage because of his health. So she felt more sort of protective of him, whereas in the previous films, he's felt a lot more protective of her. So they kind of they sort of tipped the scales slightly as well between the two of them. Yeah,
you're right, actually. Yeah, there was a change in the sort of dynamic and who was in charge, which I didn't really think about when I was watching this, but you're totally right. It did really flip in that way. So what did you think about the fact that it was a story that was based over two different time periods? There was the earlier stuff in 1965 and in 1986. And then it was kind of joined together in the third act. Did you think that worked? I know it's real life. I know it actually.
Yeah, I know. And this is what I have to keep reminding myself, because I feel like it definitely all worked. And more than that, as we were walking out the film last night, I did actually say to Chris, I was like, I have to keep reminding myself that this all happened. It's not all just jump scares for the sake of putting bums on seats at a cinema. Like, these people lived this. Like, and as far as the Warrens and the Smurls and all the other families that they interacted with, as far as they're concerned, all of this stuff, as it's portrayed, absolutely did happen. And so I think it does a really good job of, as I said at the top of the pod, bringing that through line from when they were sort of young and starting out in their career, and obviously they come across this mirror, to the mirror finds them, as it were, in the third act of the film, but also the sort of third act of their career as well. And it brings it nicely full circle that they're at a stage where they're thinking about sort of chucking it all in and moving on with their life, and actually it's their past that finds them again, so they're not able to rest until this case is resolved. So I think it does a really good job of joining that all together. And it sounds a bit silly when you say it, because you're like, oh, what's this film about? A haunted mirror. Aye, very good. It doesn't sound like much, but I think all of the demonology or whatever that you see in the film, like the scenes with the priest, with Father Gordon, when he goes to see, is it the cardinal or whatever, to try and get help for the family, like I thought those were very powerful, not necessarily scary, but just quite emotional and quite made you sort of sit up and take notice. So I think it, as I say, it does a good job of sort of tying the generations together and sort of nicely rounding off their story, and sort of, as I say, bringing it kind of full circle and showing you how they started out, the trauma that they've been through, and actually them deciding, yeah, this is enough, this is our last case.
When you look at the series as a whole, and you go side by side, the first film and the fourth film, there is a distinct move towards more sort of standard horror tropes in the fourth film than the first one. The first one is more psychological and everything. The fourth one, you're having more of the horror elements on screen. Do you think this worked, this concession to modern horror films?
I'm in two minds about it, because there were certain things that I thought of the horror that worked really, really well. Like, see the scene where Janet Smurl goes down to the basement and she's doing laundry, and you're like, there's a shadow of a man standing in that corner. That, oh fuck. And then she flicks the light on, it's a poster John Wayne, and you're like, okay, thank God. That stuff like that, I think definitely works in the Conjuring universe, and they've done that kind of thing really well up until this point. Did I need a floating baby doll getting held up by some sort of like witchy woman? No, because I feel like that's not what this film has done previously. So I think there were some elements that it retained from the original sort of first and second film that, as you say, are more kind of psychological and definitely work a lot better. Because when you've got it in your head that your house is possessed and you are down in a dark basement, you are seeing shit in a corner. You absolutely are. And so it worked and it felt very natural. But some of the jump scares in this, which I'm the first to admit I did jump at, but some of the jump scares in this, like, as I say, the floating baby doll, the giant Annabelle doll that appeared out of nowhere, and like the old woman that appeared in the middle of the street that caused Tony to crash the car, that felt a bit like, guys, this isn't what this franchise is about. You don't need these jump scares, but I see why they're doing it, essentially.
Yeah, I think you're right. There was little need for it. It was kind of pandering to audience expectations in terms of what is required for a horror film at the moment, which obviously there are outliers to that. The fact that the kind of films that they're doing in terms of horror tend to be either very psychological or very gory, and it's the gory ones that seem to bring in the bucks and bring in the audiences. So I think we're trying to bridge that a wee bit. And I think maybe I'd give them a certain amount of license on this, because they have to do something that is going to engage the audience to a certain extent, and you can only do that so much with the psychological horror. You have to have other elements in there. But
I kind of get, like, so for example, when Heather is doing that, this really freaked me out. When she was watching the video of her confirmation and she was trying to see who blew out the candles, and she's rewinding it and pausing it, and you're with her, you're watching that TV screen going, is there something there? Is there? And then she finally pauses it and you see the face reflected and you're like, fuck, there is something. That in itself, you're waiting for the jump scare. And that in itself makes you feel really tense and it makes you feel really scared. But then, of course, that's followed up by the literal axe-swinging demon that chases it across the living room. And whilst that whoever that actor was obviously looked very, very frightening. He'd like 25 million teeth, it looked like, black blood dripped all over his face. He was swinging an axe, what's not to be scared of. But for me, the sort of searching through the videotape and looking for the rewind pause, like that to me was a lot scarier than seeing somebody, as I said, literally wielding an axe and chasing someone across the room. So it annoys me in a way that they feel like they need to make this bridge, as you've perfectly described it. But I also understand perhaps why they've done it as well.
Yeah, it's all about what you enjoy with regards to horror films. It's the anticipation, like you mentioned there, is the more important part. And it was not telegraphed to you as well. The music wasn't rising and rising, you know, there wasn't that kind of thing. There was obviously music in the background, but it wasn't emphasizing it in the same way that you get from The Nun and The Nun 2, for instance. That's just, you know, you could be sitting in another room and you'd be going, well, this is the build up to the horror here, and there we go, there she is. You know, you don't actually need to see it because it's so obvious in terms of the soundtrack and everything as well. Now, with this film, rather than the previous ones, if you wanted to get sort of more from the film, you had to do a wee bit of homework for this, because there was elements of the Annabelle films in there as well. And there was a very direct one in there with "Miss Me" written on the ceiling at one point as well, with a question mark. Do you think that took away from the film, or do you think it was just, if you didn't know about it, it didn't matter?
Okay, I feel like you don't need, it's not a Marvel exercise. I don't think you need to watch the previous three in order to get what you want to get out of this one. It's a classic haunted house story. If you've seen enough horror, you know the beats it's going to hit, you know roughly how this is going to end up. You might not have seen anything particular like this, but you kind of know where this story's going. So no, and there's a few wee sort of like appearances in the wedding scene as well that you're like, that's so-and-so and that's whatever. So there's nice little nuggets there if you have seen the previous ones, but if you've not, you're not going to miss, and you know, there's no major clues that you're like, oh my god, that harks back to such and such. I feel like in a sense the Annabelle doll has become not in a sense, it has become a thing in its own right. It has its own films, but everyone kind of knows what that is anyway, so you're not looking at that doll going, what is that, why is that there? Like, there's a familiarity there just sort of generally. So I don't think you have to do your homework. I had planned to rewatch the films before we saw this, but obviously our internet was down this week, so I couldn't stream them. But you don't have to. You're not going to be missing major spoilers or major plot points if you haven't. Just a basic awareness of who they are and what they do is enough. Yes, I would agree with you there. It's not overly necessary, but it adds a wee bit of sort of pleasure to it for people who have seen all the films, and they can go, I know what that means. I know why those people are being highlighted at the wedding and everything. So yes, I did kind of understand that. But yeah, I thought it didn't take away from anything. It was kind of fleeting. So I would have liked a wee bit more information about the sort of the background to the daughter's involvement with the Annabelle doll, because I haven't seen. I think I've seen Annabelle, but I don't think I've seen Annabelle 2. And it was such a long time ago I saw Annabelle, so I'm not quite sure of what all that was really all about. So there was things in there, but it didn't really take away, because you were moving on from there fairly quickly as well. So that's quite good. Now we briefly mentioned the pacing of the film as well. So this follows a very sort of standard pattern. Do you think it still works the way that the film was paced? Yeah, do you know what? Like I said at the start of the podcast, if you've seen one of the Conjuring films before, you know exactly what you're getting. You get the sort of prelude to what's going on with a particular family in their house, spooky shit usually. The Warrens get called in, and then, you know, all the bad stuff really happens. So I think with this, you kind of know what 3-act structure you're getting. It varies slightly, as we've said. There's more kind of family dynamics, and there's a sort of, you know, montage as to them raising their kid and things like that. So I think it does vary slightly. However, you know what this is all sort of building up to. But again, that's like oddly comforting in a way. Like their lives and their careers were obviously so chaotic and so all over the place that it's actually nice to have like that little bit of structure to contrast that, and to know where a film is heading, i.e. they're going to cast a demon out. So I thought it was paced really well. When we got out the cinema, I didn't realise it'd actually run for it's like over 2 hours, I think it is, like maybe 2 hours 15 or something like that. It definitely didn't feel like that. I thought it was really well paced. I was engaged. There wasn't any moments where I was thinking, can we skip to the point here, please? I actually thought it worked really well. And I think it's because all of these films have this fairly concrete structure, as I say, and you know what you're getting yourself into. Yeah, the additional time
I think, was taken up with sort of extra time with the family, with their dynamic, and also with the Warren family as well. The way that they introduced Judy, introduced the boyfriend, how that all kind of happened as well, because like, I mean, the Warrens had a party at one point, so that was a way to introduce certain characters and bring the priest back into it, because he was at the party with them as well. So that was probably what took up the extra sort of running time, and the rest of it, like I say, was fairly solid. It was a bit of quickness at the start, and then the build up, and then after an hour or so, the Warrens actually turn up at the house, and then everything. And that's pretty much, you know, like I say, it's standard, but it didn't feel dull in any way, and it didn't feel as if we were just kind of going through the motions, because each of the stories are the same, but there are enough differences in them to make just keep you engaged. And if you have got to the fourth film, then you're engaged with this type of story anyway. So it does work okay. So I was quite interested in that. What did you think about the score and the soundscape in this? It was Benjamin Wallafish who did the soundtrack, and it's one of these soundtracks that has elements of soundscape within it, and then there's other elements of soundscape that were kind of brought in, were kind of married together. What did you think about this one?
Yeah, what I love about the Conjuring films in particular is that they don't do the, as you said, the quiet bang. What they like to do is distract you and make you look over here. And then you think, oh, thank God, because the music has already climaxed. It's fine. I'm all right. And then you turn around and you look at another corner of the screen and, oh, shit, there's something else. And the jump scare comes out of nowhere. So I really like the fact that, as you said, the score isn't necessarily signposting the stuff that's going to happen. You get that gorgeous sort of like rumbly cello that goes throughout it as well, that you know is just sort of like spooky and off kilter. And of course, like as I've said, the title cards sort of screech and scrape their way onto the screen, which is really quite a horrible sound, but it's really well done. And I think what I like about this film in particular is, you know, lots of creaking stairs, doors banging, you know, bloody doll, that mechanical doll that just kept going, mama, mama. I was like, if I hear that one more time, I'm actually going to lose my shit. So you've got all the noise of the house going on as well, which really feeds into your fears of like, where the hell is this going? But the score is, you know, it is a bit brash and bombastic what it needs to be. As I say, you've got that gorgeous sort of rumbly cello, but it's not waving a big arrow going, look here, this is the scary stuff. It lets you sort of breathe. And, you know, when things are getting a bit hefty, as in the third act, when it all comes to a head with the mirror, there was a lot of like screaming and, you know, crying and yelling out, but you're still aware of this sort of strings score going on in the background as well. It's, you know, complementing the action. So I think it does a really good job of balancing out the sort of spooky stuff, raising your heart rate ever so slightly when you're supposed to be, you know, a little bit frightened, but not when, look here, this is the jump scare coming, as you've said about The Nun.
Yes, I felt that it worked very well with the visuals. It informed the visuals, like I say, without being totally over the top and basically telling you what to do. And I liked the way that it distracted you as well. I thought it's very clever when they're able to do that properly, and it works very well here, because it does keep the tension going, where otherwise if it was a more sort of standard horror, there would be less tension involved, because it would just be like say a giant man with hundreds of teeth and an axe coming at you, and you kind of know what
my
to
new
expect.
sleep paralysis demon, yay!
Hooray!
But it's one of these scores that I always think is really well done, because, and I've said this from the start with the Conjuring films, is they're very good at distracting you and building you up to a point of frenzy, and then making you think, okay, I've survived this, before just lamping you with something else. And I feel like that does that really well. Like in particular, see the scenes where Janet Smurl, so they make a point of telling you that the kids are always pulling on the phone wire right?
Yes.
So she's constantly getting, and then you get that moment in the kitchen where she's peeling potatoes, so they're definitely Irish Catholic, and she's trying to hang on the phone, and then you've got the phone clatters on the floor. You can hear her friend's voice still coming through the phone, but then you've got that little screech coming from the cupboard that's in complete darkness, and you see the cord going in and the cord going out, but nothing in between, and the score ramps and ramps and ramps, and you're like, don't go in that cupboard, don't go in that cupboard, please, I'm begging you, don't go in that cupboard. And I just think it does such a good job of of working you up to a point of frenzy without doing the sort of big clatter stuff that a lot of horror does as well. Like, I hate, as you've said, like the quiet bang, but it also equally gives you a lot of quiet time as well. Like, as we've said, that scene where she's going through the VCR is silent. I mean, and that in itself, you're just like, something really bad is going to happen here. Why is it this quiet? So I think they do a great job of scoring these films, actually. And as you say, the soundscape is often part of that, because most of them are sort of haunted house films.
Yeah, like you say, when you walk into your own house, the last thing you want to hear is a creak when you walk in. I was going to suggest to Chris that the next time you're out that he triggers it so that your smart speaker starts playing some music from
Don't you
Conjuring.
Dare.
No,
I swear to God.
I don't think Chris would do it, because he has to live with the aftermath. So
yeah, divorce would be the aftermath. Although that does remind me of, like, and anyone who has pets will know this, that sometimes they just stare at particular corners of your house and you're going, what are you looking at? Is there a demon here? And I always remember with the cat, she kept staring into the kitchen and she would come scampering back out into the living room, and then she would go back in, and this happened about 2 or 3 times, and then our Google just went, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. And I was like, fuck, we need to burn down the kitchen.
Oh dear.
So yeah, not this my overactive imagination or anything, you know.
No, not at all. No. Okay, adult diapers. Yep. So, what were your favourite scenes from the film?
Oh, that's a good one. I did really like as I say, that whole sequence with the Father Gordon character going to see the Archbishop or Cardinal or whatever it was, because this is what I mean about distraction, right? So when he's sitting in that office and she's clattering away on her keyboard, and he turns and he starts to notice that the wire for the floor polisher is looping really quickly, and it's like these really fast, and because you're so busy looking at that, you don't notice that she's stopped typing. And it's quite a big difference in sound, because obviously she's got big long nails and she's clattering away. And of course he turns back, the secretary's gone, and you get that big screech sound because the cross on the door turns itself upside down, and you don't know what he sees, you just know that he looks completely petrified. And the next thing, you get the really confident steps coming out on the corridor. You know it's his feet, and he unplugs the Hoover wire, and you're going, what is going on here? And in a sort of scene out of The Omen, almost, he plummets to the ground, you know, really dramatically with it. So I thought that was really well done without ever actually showing you anything. It was all done through distraction and his facial reaction, which I thought was brilliant. I also, from a scary perspective, as I say, one of my favourite scenes was when Janet went down to do the laundry, and you're going, there's a guy in the corner. There's a guy in the corner. Oh my God, there's a guy in the corner. And then she flicks the light on and it calms you right down. So I thought those two, in terms of like scare factor, were the like really brilliantly executed. They properly kept me on the edge of my seat.
Yeah. For me, 2 scenes in particular kind of stood out. There was one where it was at the very start in the maternity room, and it's nighttime. This has been established before they actually get there. It's teeming with rain. There's thunder, lightning as they're going.
So it looks like the birth of the Antichrist. It's like something out of the first Omen.
It's pretty much the same as the first one, except it's a wee bit darker. And there's so much going on in that room, because obviously they're saying that the baby might be in trouble and everything before she's actually giving birth. And there's like so much chaos and everything. And then it cuts to the ceiling, and there's a sort of a lintel on the ceiling, and a hand just comes round. You're going, okie dokie, and it's this grey, long-fingered hand. And it's just there for a second. And that's repeated again when they're in the restaurant. You just see a wee shot of the hand, and it's just seconds, nothing more. But the main one for me is when Judy is trying on the wedding dress in the wedding shop, and she's in. They take her into the room with all the mirrors. That's mirrors all the way around, so that it's actually a pretty good idea, because then you can see the dress from all the angles, and you can see how it's going to look in the photographs and stuff like that. But obviously, with these mirrors and a sort of an octagon sort of pattern, you're going to get reflections within reflections, and it sort of, goes through to infinity, that kind of idea, from different angles. And she crouch down at one point? She goes down, but one of them is still standing in the distance, about 7 back of these images, and they're still standing, and you go, fucking hell, that's just so creepy. It's not just like, it would have been less creepy if it was like all of the ones 7 back, but it was just a single one. It's so well done. And then obviously it goes from there, and one of them's tapping on the glass. Oh, fucking hell. That was the one that kind of got me. I was kind of going, oh my god, it's just so freaky.
It's the fact that she's kind of joyous, and she's like, "Oh, you've just nicked my leg again," because she thinks the sales assistant has come back in, and you're like, "Oh! Yeah." It's so that was very, very tense. It reminded me obviously of like scenes, for example, from It, like in the House of Mirrors and the fairgrounds and stuff like that. There is something really freaky about mirrors, and as you say, I think it's the sort of like reflections within reflections that are, as you say, are going sort of going on to infinity. That's the freaky stuff. It's so unnatural.
Definitely, yeah. But obviously, we've mentioned these scenes, and they are outliers in terms of the film, because most of the film's not like that. Wouldn't like to give that impression that you've got all these scene after scene. These are very distinct, and they stand out because there's not very many of them. So just like to point that out before we do anything forward. So, do you think it was a fitting finale for the series?
Yeah, I do. As I say, I feel like this is like such an odd comfort watch for me, this series. I feel really invested in Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson. So I really like the way that they not only brought this full circle within the film and tied up this case that had obviously plagued them from the beginning of their career, but actually just sort of rounded everything off. And they decided obviously this was going to be their last investigation or whatever. And I always like in these films the fact that they give you the little sort of cards at the end that let you know what happened afterwards. First of all, I've got questions for the Smurls that stayed in that house for 3 whole years after the Warrens had finished their investigation. So that really freaked me out. But also the fact that they explained how the mirror had come to be haunted in the first place. I really like the fact that they finished off with that as well. So I thought it was a great conclusion, and to be quite honest with you, I suspect they will continue with this franchise because it is infinitely successful with all its spin-offs, Annabelle the Nun, etc. So we could see some Judy films, but I like the way they've wrapped up Ed and Lorraine's story in particular.
Yep, I would agree with you. Yeah, don't think there's any sort of future in any more Ed or Lorraine films. I think that's kind of done. But there is scope to have more Conjuring films with the daughter, especially because her and her then husband did go on and do the same sort of thing. In fact, they were thanked in the credits of the film as well, so they were obviously acknowledged. And there was, did you stay to the very end of the film?
I did indeed, yes.
So you saw the wee bit about the mirror at the very end?
Yeah.
Well, so, which I thought was a very nice touch. So yes, I think there is a future. There will be more Nun and Annabelle style films, and maybe other ones. I mean, there is a whole room.
I was going to say there's a basement full of props that I like the fact that like when he was taking people around at the party, he was like, "Do not touch anything because it's either possessed, haunted, or has been used in some sort of satanic ritual." And I'm like, "Why is this in your basement? Why is it in your house?" Every time they go down there in these films, I'm like, "How can you live over that, knowing that that's all in your house?" But yeah, as you said, there's a room full of stuff that they could, potentially pursue as being future sort of Conjuring spin-offs.
Yep, definitely. So would you recommend this film?
Okay, I would. Like I said, it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea because I think perhaps maybe if you've seen one Conjuring film, you maybe feel like you've seen them all. But for me, I really like this franchise. It's one that I've been invested in from the offset. I like the stories because you kind of know the actual cases, or you're vaguely aware of the real life cases as well. So I like that element of it. And yeah, if you've seen, 1 or 2 of them, definitely round off the franchise and go and see this one and make sure you see it through to its conclusion. Definitely.
Yep, I would agree. I think this is a franchise that works from start to finish. I think this film fits in very nice with the previous films, and it's up on a par with it, which is quite unusual for a fourth film in a franchise to be as coherent and powerful as it is. So yes, I would definitely recommend it. As a small aside to this, there was something in the news just yesterday, actually, about a guy called Dan Rivera, who's a paranormal investigator who died in July. He was doing a tour with the Annabelle doll, and he was found dead in his hotel room just a couple of days after the final show. And his
so the doll, the doll has also done this.
Yeah, that's kind of what they're saying, but the sort of the truth is that he had issues for years and years, health issues. He had cardiac issues, and it was a cardiac arrest he actually suffered. But the doll wasn't in the room with him or anything, but he'd done a tour with the doll, and obviously there's lots of pictures online with him with the doll, which I'd never looked at it before, but the real life doll looks nothing like the doll actually in the films. No, it's nothing.
I need to look at that properly. I know that I read
doesn't look anything like it.
The comedian Matt Rife, who's obviously quite controversial, he of the recent Elf campaign, he is supposed to have bought the Annabelle doll.
All right, okay.
Why would you do that? It's like anyone that goes down to a basement in a horror film, why? Why are you doing this? You know that's where all the bad shit lives. Why would you buy a doll that you know is possessed or like haunted or a demon is like? Why? Why would you want that in your possession?
Yep, shits and giggles. Yep.
Give you the shits, never mind. Anything else?
So that is our review of The Conjuring Last Rites. It is currently in cinemas. It's only just opened this weekend in UK cinemas. So please, if you get a chance to see it on the big screen, because it is a big screen experience, especially the third act. It's worth your while seeing it. But if you don't, it will be on a streaming service in the very near future. So look out for it, because it is a good one. What we thought we would do as our top 3 this week was to look at films that are based on real life, based on true stories. Now, as with the previous one that we did, there's an awful lot of scope here, because you can have based on a true story. This is a true story, which famously wasn't Fargo, and it wasn't a true story.
Yes,
and inspired by a true story. The way that it seems to work is when a book, a non-fiction book, is translated into a film, there are a number of changes that are made, maybe for dramatic effect or to consolidate several characters into one, that kind of idea. But the basis and the core of it is pretty much the same. So what we thought we would do is choose our top 3 based on a real event or a real story. So Mary, you're up first. What did you choose?
I was really torn for this first one. I was thinking about going with Trumbo, because I really love Bryan Cranston in that film, but I opted instead to go for Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, which came out in 2022, starring Austin Butler and Tom Hanks, to name but a few. The film obviously does take quite a few creative liberties. Lionel Parker in particular is like a pantomime villain, but I don't know if that's much to do with Tom Hanks' accent as anything else. But obviously, Baz Luhrmann has imposed his sort of usual maximalist style on everything. But the film was made with the consent and collaboration of Elvis's estate, which means I feel like there is enough historical accuracy and truth in it for it to be counted as based on a true story. So it's obviously a very extravagant biopic, call it chronicling the life of Elvis Presley, told through the lens of Tom Hanks' Tom Parker. It explores things like fame, exploitation, sort of commercialization of pop culture, how Elvis came to be a big star, all of that sort of thing. But at the heart of it is a bloody brilliant performance from Austin Butler. And I know that he did have the piss taken out of him because he actually couldn't shed the voice essentially for a number of months and years after he portrayed Elvis. But I think it's absolutely phenomenal. Like, he gives everything of himself to this role. Like, he's sweaty, he's disheveled, and by the end of the film, I was weeping because I thought it was such a brilliant performance. He has all of the charisma of the hip shaking Elvis that everybody knows and loves, but there's definitely a sort of vulnerability of what it means to be an icon as well that I think is present throughout the film. It's obviously very heavily stylized. You've got obviously an Elvis soundtrack, which is fantastic. You know all the songs, you're dancing away in the cinema. But I just think it's a very colourful, vibrant, kaleidoscopic type of film that really draws you in, that whether you actually like Elvis or not, or like his music or not, you can't help but be drawn into this story. So I think it's one of the better biopics that we've seen in recent years, because it's not quite a hagiography. It does show all of his flaws, and the fact that he got together with Priscilla when she was very, very young. It doesn't show him being a perfect husband or father either. So I think it gets the balance right of showing who Elvis the performer was and Elvis the person. So that is my first pick.
Nice one. Very good pick indeed. I loved that film. I thought it was very good. I've been a fan of Elvis Presley for years and years. It was one of my first sort of musical inspirations, and sort of, one of the people you look up to. And it was all based around the image. But with everything that's come out since his death in August 1977, then the fact that I know that it's August 1977 is bizarre as well. It's the same as, I can still say the Our Father and Hail Marys, and I know Elvis died in August.
Yeah.
Maybe August 11th or something, because it was just before I went back to school. I remember that. And I had to write about, it was the first story you had to write when you were in class about were you sad when Elvis died? For some bizarre, I don't know why. Yeah, it was. I mean, this is like primary 6 or something, and it was strange sort of thing. What we did in our holidays. Yeah, we witnessed the death of the king.
Wow.
But yeah, Austin Butler's fantastic in that film, and it's so pacey. It brings you into the story really quickly, and it kind of holds on to, because it just doesn't really stop for breath, and there's so many things going. Yes, there are elements of it that have been changed, like the 68 comeback special stuff to do with that, but that doesn't matter, because it's the core of the story. That if some of the details are not right, so what? It doesn't matter, because they're getting the essence of it, and they got that totally right, especially with the performances. Tom Hanks in it is pretty decent as well. It's horrible. Yeah, but he does a good performance here as well. So yes, I am very taken with the film. Really, really liked it. My first choice is Boston Strangler from 2023. Now, there's been 2 sort of major versions of this film. There's a late 60s, early 70s version with Tony Curtis in the film, which I'd read his biography or autobiography, and the hoops that he jumped through in order to get that role, because he was still regarded as being this sort of
as a matinee idol. Yeah,
exactly. Yes, and the way that he had to transform himself in order to just even be considered for this role, he campaigned for it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This is a 2023 version of the film, which went directly to Hulu in the States and Disney Plus. It is directed by Matt Ruskin. It is produced by Ridley Scott as well, and it stars Keira Knightley, Carrie Coon, Alexandra Novolo, and Chris Cooper. So it's a pretty decent cast. The way that it tackles this, the Boston Strangler was a crime spree in the early 60s, where 13 women were killed in very, very similar ways. The crime scene was pretty much exact in all of them, with their stockings wrapped around their neck and tied in a bow as well. So there was a lot of signatures in there as well. But it took the reporter Loretta McLaughlin, who's played by Keira Knightley, as I said, to put this all together, and from there working a story that the police were initially trying to avoid, and B, looking to put it as like different crimes and not link them in any way at all. Now, you've got to remember, this is the early 60s, so there is never a single mention of the phrase serial killer in this film, because it hadn't been coined until the late 60s. The Mindhunter.
Yes, Mindhunter, yeah.
The FBI stuff, where they actually put together the notion of the serial killer who follows the pattern, does the same things, and how they develop. So this was never in the consciousness at that point. So it was never mentioned during the film, which I thought was good, because it would have been a bit of a cheat if they'd actually mentioned it. So the character of Loretta and another reporter takes on this job and basically keeping the police to account. Now, the police then, I don't know how familiar you are with the whole Boston Strangle thing, but they got somebody for it, but it didn't quite sit right with the reporters, and they kept investigating. And then there was another murder, and it was brought into question the fact that the police, there's a scene in the film where she is listening to the tape of the confession from the guy. He's in a mental institution, and they're actually coaching him as to certain details about crime scenes. They show him crime scene photos and layouts of rooms and things like that, because they say, so when you went into the apartment, where was the kitchen? He says, oh, it was on the right-hand side. And he says, are you sure about that? You know, and he says, oh, well, maybe it was on the left. Yeah, that's right. It was on the left. And you hear him somebody shuffling papers, and if you look here, is this what it looked like? And he says, yeah, that's what it looked like. So the police were
God. Yeah.
And the Boston police weren't interacting with New York police, who were coming up with similar crimes as well. And they had suspects that they couldn't follow through on, because the Boston police wouldn't corroborate or share information with them and things like that. So it was all very mixed up, and it wasn't done well. So it was partly to do with the Boston Strangler case. It's partly to do with the way the police were complete numpties in this as well. And it's all shot in nice sort of toned down browns and greys, and everything's very sort of period, and it looks great. And Keira Knightley is fantastic in this role. She's just so good. Her initial job in this is she's in like the style section of the newspaper, and she's like reviewing a new toaster and things like that. But on the side,
that's what happens to women. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and she couldn't get a break. She was wanting to, like, she would bring these stories to the editor and say, we should be looking at this. All these other papers are looking at them, saying, the editor's saying, well, I've got 6 guys over there, they're working flat out, they don't need any more stories and all this sort of stuff. So she had to do it in her own time. But it's a really sort of compelling drama that obviously didn't get a cinema release, but is still available on Disney Plus. And I think it was on Film 4 the other week as well. So it's definitely one to seek out.
Do you know, I must admit, I saw this advertised on Disney Plus and thought it was a series. So I didn't watch it at the time, because I was watching like 25 other series at the same time. I didn't realise it was a film. I'll definitely go back and seek it out, because I thought it was going to be like, 8-10 episodes. I just didn't have time for it at that particular moment in time, but I'll definitely go and look it out.
No, a very quick 2 hours. Definitely is.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Excellent. So we'll move on to your second choice.
And again, I was going to go with something else. I was going to go with Ford versus Ferrari, which I believe is known as Le Mans 66 in some territories. But I've decided to go with the 2013 Ron Howard film Rush, because I feel like I don't get to talk about this film enough, and I absolutely bloody love it. So Rush tells the story of 2 Formula One drivers, James Hunt, played by Chris Hemsworth, and Niki Lauda, played by Daniel Brühl, during their 1976 season rivalry. So it obviously shows their contrasting personalities, talks about ambition and the risk of the sport as well, and also talks about how the sport has actually changed as a result of incidences and accidents that happen within this film. I absolutely adore this film. I think Daniel Brühl is phenomenal in it, and the fact that he wasn't looked at during awards season for his portrayal of Niki Lauda is criminal to me on so many levels. He does such a great job of encapsulating the Lauda's technical knowledge. He was obviously somebody who was very, very clever and wasn't just good at driving cars fast. He understood how the cars worked. He knew that millimeters needed to be shaved off from certain areas in order to make them more aerodynamic. He understood the danger of driving on like wet tracks, etc., because we're obviously talking about a time when Formula One cars were nowhere near as safe as they are now. And of course, in comes Chris Hemsworth, who's all swaggering booze and cigarettes, and basically has barely finished having his latest shag before he's jumped in his Formula One car to go and try and win a race of a weekend. Their And do you know what? Chris Hemsworth is great in this as well. Like, I feel like he probably doesn't get to flex his acting chops as much as this since he sort of joined the kind of Marvel franchise, but he's so good in this, playing James Hunt. And obviously the film is really largely faithful to events because, you know, outcomes of races, etc., cannot be changed. Their rivalry was a well-known fact. Lauda himself, who praised nothing over the course of his Formula One career, actually said that he liked this film. He thought the portrayal of himself was a bit harsh, but he said that he really enjoyed it and thought it was really authentic, which I think gives the film a lot of credibility as well. We also have Hans Zimmer, who scored the F1 film, giving us another absolutely brilliant score here as well, which obviously has like some 70s rock tracks. There's lots of like adrenaline-fueled music that going through it as well. And I just think it's a really sort of tightly paced film that even if you know what the outcomes of the races are and you know what happened to these particular drivers, I think the performances lend it a sense of suspense and sort of emotional, sort of compelling moments in the film as well, like, you know, in particular after Lauda's accident. And like I said, the fact that Daniel Brühl got nothing, like no acknowledgement whatsoever for this film, I think is an actual hate crime, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
I just think he's so good in this. So yeah, that is my second pick. I was torn between two car films basically, and I thought, do you know what, I don't get to talk about Rush enough, and I really like this film, so we'll go with that.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's a very good film, a very good performance by Daniel Brühl. I like the scene that always stands out for me in that film is just the one where he is with his new girlfriend and they're standing at the side of the road because the car broke down, and these two Italians stop and initially think it's because it's this beautiful woman he's with, but no, they're like, Niki Lauda.
Yeah.
It's all about, and she can't understand because she doesn't know that he is like this world famous driver, you know. He's just somebody that she's interested in. So yeah, it's an excellent pick. Really good film. And you're right, it is kind of forgotten in a way and should get a bit more love out there. So the next time we do a Formula One marathon, I think we'll
definitely.
Yep. My second pick is 127 Hours, the Danny Boyle film. This is a film about a man called Aaron Ralston who gets his arm trapped under a rock while he is out in the wilds, while he's climbing. He spends a lot of time in the isolation of the desert on his own, which he really prefers. He likes that more than he likes anything else. And this film takes you through the story of him going out into the wild. He meets a couple of people, but that's just sort of a brief interlude. And then there's an accident and he gets his arm trapped under this massive big boulder. And the only way that, you know, spoilers for real life, the only way that he can actually survive this is if he cuts off his arm, and all he has is this knife, which is not the sharpest tool that he has. I think he mentions it as being his second best knife because he knew it wasn't great, but he didn't really care about a lot of things. It was all about ego with him, with a lot of stuff when he was a younger man. Now, the way that this film is able to sustain its runtime is his mind wanders and goes to other places, and there's other sort of stories involving him, and it gives you lots of background into the type of person he is and everything like that, and the kind of mistakes that he made. And it's just a really good film, and obviously it's one that did pretty well for Danny Boyle. It's got a absolutely brilliant performance from James Franco in the certain role of Ralston. So yeah, it is sort of a very minimal film, and it's the kind of film that if you'd read the book, you could never actually imagine how they would get it onto the screen and how it could sort of sustain interest for any length of time, but it does manage to do that. So yeah,
that is a really good pick. And I definitely think that even, again, one of these films that even though you know where it's going, it's about how it's going to get there, sort of thing. It was a great. I remember the first time I watched it and just thinking, how on earth, as a human, do you make that decision, and how do you go ahead with it? And as you say, the scenes where he's like vaguely delirious and stuff like that as well are really interesting in terms of building up who he is as a person. Yep,
definitely. So your third pick.
So my last pick is Spike Lee's 2018 Black Klansman, because I feel like we've not really talked about that as well. So that stars John David Washington, Adam Driver, Topher Grace, and Jasper Pekinen for Vikings fans. as well. So this is obviously based on Ron Stallworth's memoir, although I do think they say it's loosely based, so I'm not sure if maybe this is the right pick for this section. So the film follows a black detective, obviously played by John David Washington, who infiltrates the Ku Klux Klan in 1970s Colorado Springs. And it's obviously a satire on racism, injustice, identity, and a nice bit of contemporary social commentary as well. I think John David Washington is really good in this film. It must be quite hard to step out from the shadow of your father when your father is obviously Mr. Denzel Washington. But I think he's excellent in this. It's, really charismatic and really grounded. Adam Driver is brilliant in everything and equally good in this as well. But the standout for me is actually Topher Grace. So his portrayal of David Duke, I think, is quite frightening in how understated and chilling he is in this. And Topher Grace was he was in Win a Date with Tad Hamilton and stuff like that. He was this wee early 2000s pin-up. So seeing him in this role, I think, is really fascinating and a really brilliant career choice. I think I did look into it a little bit, and whilst obviously the core story is true, some characters and events have been fictionalized, as you've said, to sort of consolidate drama or move things along. But it does say it's based on that memoir. There's lots of humor, there's lots of drama, there's lots of thriller elements as well. I feel like the pacing's really good, and I think obviously, as we've said, the social commentary in it is still relevant to today, unfortunately. You've got a really good soundtrack, and I think it's just one of these things where, because it's Spike Lee and that he's got very strong opinions on, politics and racism and injustice, that really shows through the film. And you've got a use of archival footage in the ending as well, which I think sort of grounds it in reality. It's, in a way, it kind of reminds me of Django, for example, and it's sort of willing to make fun of the racists, but it's never, you're laughing at them, not with them, which I think obviously is the distinction. But yeah, I just thought it was a good one because I thought we haven't really talked about it, and I think it's a great film, and it'd be one that I would really like to explore in depth in future.
That's a good shout because I've never seen the film. So
have you not?
No. I knew of it when it was about, and I saw all the publicity around it, and I've seen some of the scenes from it, some of the more
the phone call scene,
the phone calls and all that. Yeah, that's probably it. But yes, it's definitely one that is worthy of a fuller review. And obviously Spike Lee has a body of work as well, so that could be one for a wee marathon at some point, if my health holds out, obviously.
Do you need to go in summer by the seaside to get some air in you? Is that it?
Some clean air. That's what I'm needing. Yes. So my final pick is a film called Everest from 2015. It was directed by Baltasar Komakur, an Icelandic director, and it's a bit of a big cast on this one. You've got Jason Clarke in the main role, with support from Josh Brolin, John Hawkes, who I love. I think he's one of these, when you look at character actors, he's one of the guys you say, yep, he's brilliant. Anything he's in is just so good. Robin Wright's in it, Emily Watson, Keira Knightley again. This is a wee Keira fest that we got going today. Sam Worthington and Jake Gyllenhaal. Now,
that's a huge cast.
I know. The film itself is based around the idea that during the 90s, there were commercial climbing expeditions and companies that facilitated this for people who were basically guided up mountains. And obviously the biggie is Everest, and that would attract the sort of the biggest paying clientele, and the more experienced climbers would want to go on these things. But the problem that they had was there were so many of these companies, and there is a limited time frame that you actually have where it's reasonably, I say safe, it's never safe to climb a fucking mountain, let's face it. There is a period where it's I think it's late spring, sort of April, May, June,
where you're less likely to die.
Correct, yes. But for this particular expedition in 1996, the weather had been particularly bad, so the window was smaller, so you were getting lots more parties trying to do the climb at roughly about the same time. They would all work with each other and say, well, we're going now, you can go in 4 days or 5 days, whatever, that kind of idea. So they would all be able to do it properly. But there was it was all kind of concertinaed in together, so it was like a much shorter period. So there was more emphasis on getting people actually up the mountain and less emphasis on the safety of it. So there was gambling involved in this. So they would take, basically, the main guy, Rob Hall, who is a very experienced climber, and he's well known within the climbing world and everything. He took his party up there, and of course they encountered problems. And it was like reasonably close to the summit, and there was all sorts of problems with like oxygen and things like that. They had to have oxygen at certain places, and if you're talking oxygen for like 6 or 7 people, then it's quite a lot of stuff that you're having to sort of put at various stages. And some of them, like the oxygen wasn't there, and the bottles were empty and things like that, and it caused all sorts. I mean, it turns into this real like survival drama, basically. And part of it is the people still want to get to the summit because they're getting so close to it and everything. There's accidents and all sorts of things. And then it's all about, the second half of the film is really all about the accidents that all happened and everything, and the problems that happened. And I knew nothing about this story before I actually watched the film. And there is this spectacular, visual feast. I think it was like one of these IMAX films. So I'd never saw an IMAX, but it would have been spectacular to see it on that. And I think there's a 3D version of it as well. So it was the really sort of the visual aspect was really put forward, but there was also the human aspect of it as well, because you've got these guys up in the top of the mountain, but you've got people at base camp, and then you've got people back home in New Zealand and all sorts. And it's, the way that they're trying to communicate, and they can't get anybody up onto the mountain because of the weather, so they couldn't actually like get helicopters or anything up there because of the weather. And I think helicopters can only go so high because they're relying on the certain density of the air to actually function properly. So when you get to a certain height, helicopters don't function as well because there's not the same, because the air is a bit thinner, which I didn't know about. I saw it in another film as well, that they were trying to get up to something else. But anyway, this was, pretty crazy, and it's real sort of edge of the seat stuff, because it is life and death all throughout it. It's just a really good film, and I am not going to give away what happens.
No, don't.
Just I would not do that. But yeah, it's definitely worth a watch. I think that was on Prime. I think I saw that quite recently. But again, it's one of these ones that pops up in Film 4. Every now and again, one of their sort of staple ones. So if you get a chance, give that one a watch.
Definitely. It's almost vaguely sounding like the sort of the submarine thing, where obviously they paid all these billionaires paid to go down in that, and it's like, you can pay to have that experience, but is it actually safe? Which obviously is the key point of this, if there were so many groups going up at the one time. But it sounds like a really stacked cast as well, and as you see, visually I imagine that's very, very striking, and an Icelandic director, so he'll be familiar with snow.
Yes, quite. Yes, yeah, definitely worth a watch. Yep. So that is our choices for our top 3s, and that is the end of the podcast for today. You can find us at all the normal social media channels. Please get in touch. All you need to do is look for Moviescramble, and if you find us at the Moviescramble places within social media, you'll also see our own individual tags as well. If you want to get in touch with us at all, you can email us at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. We are looking to continue with our 1995 marathon. I believe the next one we're going to be doing is Bad Boys and Die Hard with a Vengeance. So that's a possible choice for the next pod, which will be interesting because, blockbuster action cinema is an interesting topic too.
And we've been so highbrow for the past few weeks as well.
Yeah, we've been doing well, let's face it. So all that remains to say from myself and Mary is goodbye. So cheerio.
Bye.